Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I have Ingo here with us to walk us through effective data visualization. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to leave that up in the chat or the question answer feature in the top right hand corner of your screen. We should get started here. Thank you.
Thanks, Karini, and good morning and welcome everyone to another webinar. Today we're going to talk about effective data visualization. So I'm going to share a few things with you, what actually an effective data visualization really means and what are some of the kind of like tips and tricks and best practices you want to pay attention to when you build a dashboard. Now, important this, is not necessarily only related to SAP Analytics Cloud. This is basically a technology independent session. So it doesn't really matter if you're not using SAP Analytics Cloud or Tableau, Power BI, Click, all the different kind of tools. It's more about a generic kind of like understanding of what are some of the things that you want to pay attention to. Now, before we get started, just a little bit, a few words about kind of like Simplify and who we are. We'll keep it short so we get to the content quickly. Simplify is basically a long-term SAP partner in the analytics, planning, and data warehousing space. So when I say long-term, we're talking about 10 plus years, and you can see some of the areas that we're focusing on. The main focus is really, if you want to say so, broad in the broad perspective, SAP Analytics. Now this goes from like HANA, BW, DataSphere, Business Data Cloud, and it's also on the planning side, basically going from SAP Analytics Cloud, the group reporting, consolidation kind of topics. If you look at us from a partner perspective, I'm not going to go through each of the items here, but we basically, one of the items you will notice is that the people in our company have been in the business for a long time. I myself have been in the SAP field for like 20 plus years now, focusing on the analytics area. And I think that's one of the key differentiator between us and some other partners is simply the number of years of experience that we bring to the table. And on top of that, it's not just that we're basically a services company, we're also focusing on what we call accelerators. So it's not just that we're coming to you with basically, selling you like a consultancy contract, so to speak, but also we do have pre-built content that we can leverage depending on what your need is that actually accelerates the time to actually implement what you're looking for and shorten that overall time frame. In terms of customers, you can just see there's a huge set of customers that goes across the globe. So this is Canada, US, this is EMEA, and you can see based on the topics, it goes across the broad spectrum of analytics, going from SAP Analytics Cloud, simple dashboarding, reporting, to planning, to data warehousing, to also things like replacing legacy technology with what SAP has to offer. So let's start with the visualization topic. And I'm going to start with a few quotes that I always feel kind of like, communicate very well what really effective data visualization means. Both of them coming from Stephen Fu. In case you have not heard about Stephen Fu, you might want to look him up. He's one of the kind of like, so to speak, founding fathers around data visualization. He's written a lot of books around it, and he basically kind of shares a lot of his experience and knowledge in those books about kind of like how you want to visualize information. The key part, it's really about looking at what is your objective. So a data visualization shouldn't necessarily be about kind of like, lots of like fancy bright colors and kind of like all kind of like, navigation capabilities. You might actually be overloading kind of like your user that is looking at the dashboard. It's more the opposite. It's about simplicity. It's basically highlighting the key facts and kind of like supporting those with what you're showing on screen, and on screen meaning actually a single screen. And that rule of a single screen applies to regardless if we're talking about kind of like 34-inch screen in your office, or perhaps a 50-inch screen on the wall, or your iPad. I shouldn't have to kind of like scroll up and down and left and right on my screen to basically find the information that I'm looking for. The other quote I will use to start with is there's two key elements in here. If you start building a dashboard, report, or some form of data visualization, one of the key questions you want to ask is really, what are we trying to actually communicate? What is the problem we're trying to solve? What is, for example, your strategic goal that you're after? If that is something that you can't really answer at the point when you're putting your dashboard into production, then kind of like we have a problem, because what did we actually design if we didn't understand what the problem is in the beginning? The other part is what I would call is like your dashboard should be self-explanatory. If you're showing your dashboard to someone else in terms of like for feedback, and basically you're sitting next to the person and you have to constantly basically repeat kind of like you have to click here, you have to click here, ask yourself, is that is something that kind of like you would like to consider a good design? It should be actually self-explanatory. You shouldn't have to actually explain the person constantly where to click or kind of like what to do. I want to show you two items before we start with a set of best practices. And if you look on the screen right now, you will actually see a data visualization that's quite famous. It was actually published out shortly after the war, like long time ago. It was like COVID in Beirut and so on started, and someone published basically this in a newspaper. Now, when you look at the screen on the left side, I'm sure most of you will associate basically some kind of blood with the color red, plus it is basically going from up to down. So it's kind of like dripping. On top of that, the term bloody is in the header. So as the next screen, I want to show you that with a very small set of changes, the message can be very different. All what we're going to change is the header, the orientation, and the color. We're not changing anything on the data. We're not changing any of the facts that are basically there. We're simply changing the header, the color, and the orientation. And now the message might not be as bad as it was when we open up the first screen on the left-hand side. Fact is, the numbers are declining. So you can see it was like a very small set of like, changes. The message can be very, very different. The reason why I'm showing this here is really in terms of like, you need to realize that with a small set of items, and the message can be very different. It can be very impactful as well. So, something like a color or something like a chart orientation can change kind of like the view on the data already, even though we didn't actually change any of the numbers. The other part I want to show is what I would like you to do. And I know we're doing a webinar. Normally I'm doing this live in the front of an audience, so it might kind of like sound a little bit weird, but close your eyes for a second when you look on the screen. I'm going to bring up the next slide. So I want you to open up your eyes and then think about what you're actually seeing. So normally when I do this in an actually live audience, after like 2 or 3 seconds, the first set of hands are going up and people are actually saying this is actual versus budget. The reason why I'm doing this is I didn't have to explain the fact that perhaps the first 3 months are your actual, and the next 9 months are budget. It is something that you actually made in your head on your own. I didn't have to explain that. The concept behind it is the first 3 months are not like, it's not about blue or black or white. It's about being filled, and the other 9 months are empty. So it's actual versus your budget or your forecast. The reason why I'm showing this here is simply about there are certain kind of things that you can leverage around data visualization where people will remember things, people will recognize things, and you can actually use that to your advantage so that people are not, so to speak, are reading your dashboard like a book from the left to the right, but they are consuming the information. What you're looking at right now is basically following a concept which is called IBCS, standing for International Business Communication Standard. It's actually a global standard around how you should visualize financial numbers and what you want to use in terms of colors and fonts and charts. It even has been acknowledged by the SEC, for example, for financial reports. And we're coming back to the topic, what this actually means or what this could mean for yourself in terms of your own dashboards. So what are some important items that when you start your next projects? First of all, ask yourself, what is actually the problem that we're trying to solve? What are the business goals? Like, basically, why are we here to create the dashboard? What is the key message that we're trying to actually convey to our audience? Don't just kind of start the dashboard by, so to speak, let's build it and then we build it and they will come. If your business user doesn't understand the dashboard, most likely they will simply stop looking at it. And then basically you have one of those, so to speak, kind of dead dashboards in the system. Nobody's looking at, but also remember that also means nobody's actually seeing the numbers, nobody's actually seeing what you're trying to convey. Really think about kind of what is, from a business perspective, the value that you can bring to the table by creating the dashboard and actually communicating the situation. What are the strategic KPIs you want to use? The second part is, who's your audience? And also, what is your audience capable of? And I'm not kind of trying to explain that in a negative way. It's not about one person is being capable of more things than the other. It's more about understanding what your audience is using. So to give you a concrete example, you might have some people in the finance area that need regular numbers and they would prefer to work in an Excel spreadsheet with the numbers versus a dashboard. I'm sure all of us have been there. Now, for example, with SAP Analytics Cloud, this could mean that for one set of audience, you have a dashboard. For the other set of the audience, you have the same kind of information, but you offer it in the Excel plugin. There might be a third audience that basically just need a set of numbers for a regular meeting. Perhaps you even prepare a PowerPoint with a chart and kind of like a textual representation. So this is the important part here, is kind of like, who is your main audience and what is the critical part? Now, we talked about, for example, the finance team looking at an Excel spreadsheet. So if you're sending the Excel spreadsheet to your CEO, he might not be interested in seeing all the numbers. He just needs a set of KPIs and to understand where the company is and what are some of the critical items he needs to follow up on. So that's the important part, to understand really your audience and kind of you want to think about, how can you make your own personas. You don't have to start with a huge set, but think about 2 or 3 different kind of personas that for the next project you creating for yourself, and you're putting in a few characteristics. What do you expect of them and how are they using actually your dashboard? Insights and actions are a critical part of your dashboard. If you just communicate this is the current situation, that's great. But what is the next step? And an action could mean navigating a user to another set of information. An action could mean navigating a user into an operational system. Perhaps one of the items that your dashboard is communicating is basically that you're running out of products. Let's assume let's say a retail store and you're running out of products. So one of the action could mean we'll have to order. So think about insight and actions, not just as inside of your dashboard, so to speak, as a closed environment. Insight and action should consider your complete landscape. One of the action could mean to basically send out an email. One of the action could mean that you're navigating into your S4 system, potentially lowering prices because you want to run a promotion, potentially ordering elements and products. So don't think about just what can you do inside your dashboard, but actually really what is the overall situation and what's the overall workflow where perhaps you can provide that next step as part of your dashboard and navigate the end user already to the next step. Now let's talk about best practices. So yes, one of the items that you should be looking at is what people refer to as your own visual guidelines, your own visual notations. What are your colors? What are your fonts? What are kind of like, how do you want to organize your dashboards from an overall structure? Think about this. If you open up Excel or Word today, none of us has to actually look for the save button anymore because we all know the save button is on the top left. If you're looking on your phone, you'll know where the button for email is. Because it's basically in that little bar at the bottom, unless you actually remove it there. But that's where it is, first of all, by default. So your own visual notation is really around how do you, as your own company, communicate certain things, going from as simple as which colors you want to use, which fonts, which icons do you want to use, for example, for filtering, for print, for export. Do you even want to offer an export option? And all your dashboard should basically look and feel the same. So if we start with looking at dashboards or data visualizations from a broader perspective. So first of all, yes, it's all about visuals. It's not about like, two paragraphs of text. It's about charts. It's about kind of like colors, visual elements. It should be on a single screen. Don't start building a dashboard kind of like if you're basically at home and you have a 34-inch screen and then your end user only has, let's say, a 24-inch screen and they need to start scrolling up and down and left and right. Um, because if they start scrolling, that means they are losing context. And yes, it should be instantly accessible. I put that in. It's not necessarily really around the data visualization, but imagine yourself if you open up the Google screen and you put in a text and Google doesn't respond in kind of like 5, 6, 7 seconds, you might actually start closing down the Google screen. You open up Edge, you try to do the same thing on Edge. If Edge doesn't come back, you go back to Google and so on. So people are not kind of like in the, so to speak, they're not waiting anymore 20, 30, 40 seconds to see the numbers. It's really about, I want to see the information now, and I don't want to wait, let's say, 30 seconds for the number to pop up. Important, what are the objectives? I mentioned it before. If you start building an actual dashboard, ask yourself, what are basically the objectives of your stakeholders? What are the strategic goals? What are the KPIs from a company perspective that you're looking at? So, what does it actually mean in certain concrete items? So first of all, a few standard items, number scaling. If you have large numbers, like it goes into millions or 100,000, scale them. But if you do scale them, make sure you scale them consistently. What I mean by that is if you're building basically a page and you have two, let's say, column charts, and one is scaled on millions and the other one is scaled on 100,000, visually that can lead to a problem, because if I compare perhaps the height of a bar from left to right, the left one might be millions, the right one might be 100,000. So I might actually make some wrong consumptions. So if you do scale your numbers, consider it to basically do an identical scaling as part of your overall design. Include the units. Like I very often see customers creating data visualizations where it's about sales revenue, but then you look at the chart and it doesn't kind of like show scaling. It doesn't even show what currency it is. Even though you might only deal with one currency, just put it in, because you might have a new employee just started tonight and the person is not aware that basically all the items are in US dollars or in Canadian dollars. At least put some kind of information out there. And use context. And I will give you a concrete example. What I mean by that is just showing the revenue isn't really helpful, because we might make like 5 million in revenue this month, but if compared to last year we actually made 10 millions, then we have a problem. So without that information, I don't know if 5 million is good or bad, or we're basically nearly bankrupt. So in terms of like context, here's a very concrete example. Perhaps you show me my gross margin is 94. Well, is this percentages? Is this absolute numbers? Is this basically dollars? There's no units, there's no currency, there's no kind of like behind it. And also there's no context. How did we, as an example, do compared to last year? So now if we're looking on the right-hand side, it shows it's million US dollars. It's Q1 2024 versus Q1 2023. So I know how to basically interpret that 29.5%. So we're actually doing much better than we did last year. So that's great. So instead of just a plain number, I'm seeing the context around it, and I can actually make much more information out of that than if we're looking at the plain number on the left-hand side. So to put this into more context, if you actually start building data visualization, we talked about the identical scaling already, but you should also use similar structures. And what I mean by that is, now imagine we're talking about a column chart and a bar chart. So if you look at a column chart goes from left to right. So in your dashboard, there's pretty much only one element that goes from left to right, which is time. So any information that you're plotting over time goes, for example, on like a line chart or a column chart. But revenue by month would not be a bar chart. Anything that is not time, so revenue by country, revenue by product, would be a bar chart. It would never be a column chart. And it might sound like a very small item, but by doing and following these very simple rules, people will recognize basically how overall you're designing and you're structuring your dashboards. And again, people will recognize these kind of things. So the consuming information is going to happen much quicker, and people will consume the information versus, as I mentioned, reading actually your information like a book. The other part, you should always include what measure are we looking at, what time periods are we looking at, what is our currency or unit, and in case there is a filter, what filter did we apply? This is something your chart should show as part of the title and the subtitle, as you see on the right-hand side. And it can easily be done as part of like SAP Analytics Cloud, but Again, it's about consistency. It's about showing always the relevant information. Why do we want to do this? Imagine someone is basically taking a screenshot. Somebody is exporting your chart into PowerPoint, but they filtered down the information. Well, if this information isn't part of your chart overall, then it will not be part in the PowerPoint. And you're losing that context on what was this number that we're looking at? Like, was this basically Q1? Was it Q2? What other filters were used? The other part I want to actually show you is a very simple kind of like little change in the overall approach. Very often I see like, customers using charts similar to what you see on the left-hand side. This is our monthly revenue in million USD. Nothing wrong with it. It's great. We're looking at the numbers and we can see the numbers for, in this case, for 1 year. But how about we're actually changing the title to how are our monthly sales performing? It might sound again like a small change, but what you're basically doing in this step is you're actually asking a question. You're basically engaging with your user. You're not just like, here's the monthly revenue. It's like, how is our monthly sales performing? It's a different kind of like engagement with your end user looking at your dashboard. In terms of overall structure, here's a suggestion. Again, there's lots of different kind of materials out there. You want to start at the top of your overall dashboard structure with like, where are we right now? Basically, think of it like this is the situation we're in right now. These are the critical KPIs. That's what you want to start with. If you can, as a next level further down, you want to bring in proof in terms of what has the trend been. Perhaps your revenue is basically down. So instead of just showing we have 10% less revenue, perhaps you want to bring in a chart that shows the revenue over time, showing the trend for the last 6 months to prove basically here's kind of like how this 10% less actually materialized over the last 6 months. And then at the bottom, you want to bring in supporting measures and what potential actions can be done. Now, supporting measures, as an example, perhaps we're looking at the sales revenue. A supporting measure could be like, how quickly are we closing deals? How many customer visits did we have the last 6 months? Think about that. What kind of like related measures can you bring to the table, so to speak, that are actually leading to, in our example, sales revenue? Another part you want to think about it is alignment as part of your dashboard. If you look at the left-hand side, or the right-hand side, and I took the figures in terms of a guy in a suit or a guy basically, dressed up more casual, that's what I mean by that. If you're basically building a dashboard and things are not aligned, and in this case, alignment doesn't mean center, it means left or right, it simply throws our eyes off. And what that means, it takes longer to consume the information. So if things are aligned, like, left, right, and kind of like they all, fit into a certain structure, it is for us as humans easier to consume the information. So now we're coming to colors. First of all, you need to realize that we as humans, as part of like, consumption, we can only consume a handful of colors kind of like at one point in the time. It's not like that we're really capable of kind of like consuming, I take that like famous example, a pie chart with 20 different slices and colors. We're not. Actually, the limit is 7. So there's like different kind of color schemes out there. If you see on the left-hand side, there's sequential colors. You would normally use those, for example, if you show a certain measure, and comparing things in terms of like, who has more revenue or less. Imagine you're taking a map out of US and you color code each state on the map with like, a color matching a certain revenue. So you would use actually one color and different shades of one color. The diverging color scheme is more kind of like you have a neutral point in the middle and you're going left or right. So it's more about basically, for example, positive and negative. And then categories, for example, showing like, certain things by product, certain things by kind of like an area where each item has a color associated with it. Now, important, if you are using qualitative color schemes, make sure that you're sticking to the colors across your dashboards. So what I mean by that is normally what I bring up as an example, let's assume we're actually selling cars. So if, for example, silver is the color you use for like Mercedes as a brand, and red is for Ferraris, then that should be in each of your dashboards. Where actually red is a pretty bad example, and we're coming to that in the next slide. So the other part around colors is you want to use some what people refer to as a white space or a negative space, and I will give another example in the next slide. You see in the right hand side very nicely that there's basically negative space between each of these areas. The other item, you noticed probably that this isn't perfectly aligned, so we're actually breaking a rule right here. But what you notice is we have certain colors that are our dominant colors. We made a decision, and I'm sure each of you have some company colors. We made a decision to going with kind of like a mainly teal color for the numbers and for the charts, with a black background and some basically space between each of these areas. You also notice on the left-hand side, there are certain people refer to as accent colors and semantic colors. Let's start with the semantic colors. As I mentioned, choosing red for the brand Ferrari might not be the best choice because for us as humans, red means something is wrong. There's an alert. So showing, for example, revenue over 12 months in a red color might not be the best idea. And green might mean everything is great, even though perhaps it's not. So those are colors you don't want to use actually as part of your dashboard to show numbers. Those are actually colors like the semantic colors you want to use for certain kind of situations where there is a threshold has been reached, positive or negative. You're indicating that. That is the critical part. Accent colors are, for example, you have things like an export button. You have like a button for filtering, a button for like a print. You always want to use the same color, the same look and feel for those kind of things. And then that color is kind of like you shouldn't use for something else in the dashboard. So coming back to the white space, you can see basically another example, this time also nicely aligned all the elements, but you want to make some space between each of your elements. It's basically giving your eyes something to rest on. And if you try it yourself, if you build your next dashboard and you put everything tight next to each other, no space, you built the same dashboard, you just put like, 1 or 2 pixels space between each of your elements and then look at each, like, for a few seconds. You will notice that basically the second dashboard feels, more comfortable, so to speak. Remember, we talked about our own notations. So colors is one part of it. So one of the items you want to actually set up is what are your colors? What's your font? What are actually, for example, for qualitative, what are your standard colors you want to use? What are your standard sequential color schemes you want to use? And really just define it once and, so to speak, put it away so that then each dashboard is using the same color scheme, because it's really about recognizing things and giving everything the same look and feel. Um, it's can easily be done, if you go out, there's lots of like examples of color schemes. If you're an SAP customer, you can, for example, go and actually, Google, for example, SAP Belize or SAP Horizon. So the notion of which colors are going good together, that kind of like thinking, people already have done. And there is, like, pre-configured color schemes already out there that you can adopt. But obviously, I'm sure lots of you also have like corporate colors that perhaps you want to incorporate. But the critical element here is really defining it once and then keep using it in your dashboards. If you're not sure kind of like which colors go well with each other, um, my favorite tool when it comes to that is basically on the Adobe website. It's free to use. There's a color wheel where you can basically go in and you actually can configure. Do you want to have colors that go well with each other, or colors that are basically very contrast against each other? You choose one, and then they will show you basically, for example, contrasting colors or colors that are actually complementary to what you just selected. And they have a lot of, like, even color schemes well thought out that you can leverage with hex codes and everything, and you can use that. If you do that as part of the coloring, don't forget about the font. It's part of it. Which font do you want to use? This might actually, or we could talk for hours now about numbers and how are numbers and fonts important, specifically if we're talking financial reports, so that the numbers are aligning properly, even though we're looking at different font sizes and so on. But also, this is part of your notation. What font sizes do you want to use? Think of this like, when you build a PowerPoint, I'm pretty sure you all use a certain kind of template, where the template has a certain font and a font size and the header. It has a font and a font size for the first line of text. And then if you do an indentation, it all has that sitting in the slide master. Now, this is what you're basically designing for your dashboard. Think of it like, your slide master in terms of like font sizes, colors for your overall dashboard to make sure it looks and feels the same across the board. So we went through a couple of things, and I want to show you a few examples also afterwards. But one of the items is critical is consistency. And consistency starts with you having a notation, like these are the rules that we want to follow. But the consistency also ends with basically a checklist. And I'm coming back to that. So before you push the dashboard into production, you want to walk through a few little checklists and kind of like, did we follow all the rules that we said we're going to put out? Um, for example, common terms. You might have noticed in the beginning we talked about some online help. You might have certain terms that you use as part of your industry, your business, but not everybody might actually know them right away. Think about what would a person that as like day one know when they look at the dashboard. Perhaps there are certain items, certain abbreviations they don't understand yet. So something like a little text box or like a little online help where they can, for example, see these terms might be a huge help. Consistent navigation. If you offer filters in your dashboard, don't have one dashboard where the filters is on the left and the next dashboard the filters are on the right. Right? Remember, we all know where the save button in Word is because it has been there the last 10 years, always in the same spot. To me, a very good example is basically your iPhone. If you take your iPhone and you look at it, you see at the bottom there's 4 icons. And actually, by default, these icons are all the same. Now you can obviously customize, but it doesn't matter if you basically take your iPhone portrait or landscape, it will always be 4. It doesn't matter if it's like iPhone 16, 15, 14, it's always 4. And one of them is your email. Like Apple didn't change this the last couple of years because, again, it's about consistency. It's about people recognizing that, yeah, at the bottom there's my email. I click on it. So I want to show you a few examples in terms of like, good and bad design choices. So here we have actually a chart that shows right now in blue the revenue in profit, and then the line green is our gross profit in percentages. Now, with a live audience, I normally would now ask, okay, what's wrong, so to speak, and we would discuss this for a few minutes. But if you look at the left-hand side, the first item is the units. So it's 700,000. So it doesn't say if it's US dollars, Australian dollars, Canadian dollars, could be boxes, something else. We don't know. The unit is missing. The currency is missing. Also, we're not scaling. So 700,000, I don't need to see all the zeros. It could be 700K. And then the color doesn't help at this point. So to me, color is something very simple. When you start using a color as part of a chart, ask yourself the question, does the color help in communicating what you're trying to communicate? If the answer is no, then why are we using the color in the first place? It doesn't help. It confuses more. So here's some items that are basically not helping, right? We talked about the units, which measure is on which axis. If you decide to do a dual axis chart, which we actually do here, then at least communicate which measure goes on the first, y-axis and which measure goes on the second y-axis, because otherwise I'm going to start guessing. So here's an example on the right-hand side, the same information, but I would suggest less confusing. So we started using less colors. We got rid of actually the dual axis, and we're using data points, which are much easier to communicate and much easier to rate. We scaled the numbers. So instead of like 350,000, it's 351. And you see in the title of the chart, it says in K US dollars and percentages. The percentages for the gross profit. It also shows 2020 to 2023 ACT for actual. Now, the other thing you will notice is that the revenue and the gross profit are now overlapping. So some people might say, oh yeah, that's great. We're saving space. That's great if we communicate on the mobile, so we need less space. But there is something behind it. The reason why it is okay that I use overlapping bars is because these numbers are related to each other. My profit is part of the revenue. If those numbers are not related, you should not overlap them. So, coming to an end, remember I talked about the final checklist. So before you push out the dashboard into production, go back to your notations, go back to your guidelines that you agreed on, take a check on the colors, take a check on, did you use the same icons for filtering, for printing, for export? Is the filter on the left like we agreed on, or did we put it on the right and we have to change this? Basically create for yourself a handful of checkboxes that you want to go through before the dashboard goes out into production. Because the worst that you can do is you can start the process and actually, so to speak, create consistency across all your data visualizations, but then half through the process, you're pushing out a dashboard that didn't follow the rules, and it's going to confuse everybody. Just to kind of like, summarize a few of the items we talked. Remember, we talked about the overall composition, we talked about the coloring, the consistency in terms of like colors, labels, navigation. Those are all critical elements you want to put into your checklist in terms of where do you want to go, what do you want to basically make sure keep consistent across all your dashboards. And start with a small approach. Don't just think that basically overnight you're going to basically now change all your dashboards. And there will be reluctancy. There might be actually people that prefer dashboards with like 20 different colors, and they feel kind of this looks like super sexy with all the different colors and flashy things. Start with perhaps one of your next projects. Start with one team. Explain why you chose the approach and what the logic behind it is, and then show them the differences. And I'm pretty sure they will quickly notice that they're actually spending less time in consuming the information. It becomes easier to look at the data, it becomes easier to consume, and it becomes easier to recognize like certain thresholds, certain steps where like there needs to be an action, certain like outliers. It becomes quicker to recognize these kind of things. The other part I will leave you with is data visualization is one of those things that it is something you want to keep practicing on. And you want to take a look at how other people are doing it. You want to learn, basically, so to speak, from others. One of the items I, for example, keep looking at least like once or twice a week is at the New York Times. Not that I'm going to read the whole newspaper, but the New York Times basically has a team of 20, 25 people doing nothing else than data visualizations. And they have blogs and articles where they explaining also why have they chosen certain kind of like charts or certain colors, certain ways of doing things. So it's an easy way to kind of like learn from them and understand it. As part of the slides, you will see also kind of like a couple of books where I recommend. Just want to highlight a few. So these two are basically more from the business side. They talk about what it actually means to create a self-service analytics environment, what is actually involved, what is some of the change management that people go through. These are data visualization books. Again, technology independent. Um, some of them kind of like do examples in Excel. Some talk about Power BI. Some talk Tableau. Some talk SAP. Um, the and some also, for example, the one on the left, top left, Andy Kirk, he talks about the process on kind of like gathering requirements. You see the one on the right hand side, solid outlined hatched. That one is about the IBCS notation. Remember the revenue chart that I showed in the beginning was black and white, like filled and empty. That's what this is about. It outlines kind of like that approach in a great format. The other item I just want to highlight is the Makeover Monday on the left. If you actually Google Makeover Monday as term, you will come to a community that was created from people mainly working with Tableau, but it's open to everyone. And what it actually shows is that you get a dashboard pretty much communicated on a weekend. And then that's where the name comes from, Makeover Monday. On Monday, people send in their dashboard, like overhauling basically what was communicated and explaining why they made certain kind of like changes and choices, and people are actually sharing each other's feedback. So it's a very great way to see what choices other people make, but also to get your own feedback and pretty much learn from everybody else. So with that, I would like to open it up for question and answers. So let me just take a quick look if we do have any questions. So yes, so the slides and the recording will be shared, absolutely. you will actually, and if you go to our YouTube channel, you will see that pretty much all our webinars are actually pushed out to YouTube. So you can actually follow it up there. You can listen and watch the whole recording as part of a YouTube. You don't have to kind of like follow a certain link. It's basically pushed out to the YouTube channel there. So in case you have any kind of questions around the topic, feel free to use the chat or kind of like the questions panel, and I'm happy to answer it. So Tammy is asking, is IBCS accepted in North America? It's an interesting topic. So um, IBCS, remember, and I'm just going to bring up the slide that I showed in the beginning. IBCS is basically the slide where we're talking about using a very, very small set of colors with a very, very small set of charts, actually. Um, is it accepted in North America? Yes, it is. Is it widely adopted? I would say not yet. It is definitely accepted. So IBCS has been accepted by the SEC, for example, for reporting financial numbers. IBCS actually reached lately that it is accepted as a DIN standard for Europe. So it definitely is accepted. It hasn't been adopted yet, like, super widely. And I think part of the problem is that when IBCS started, they were mainly focusing on financial numbers, where I do feel that, if you look at what IBCS explains to you and what you should be doing, it doesn't matter if it's a financial dashboard or if it's a HR dashboard or if it's a sales dashboard. The same rules you can leverage and apply. It's about consistency. It's about how you want to show the numbers. Um, and I feel that it basically takes a slower adoption like over the years, and it will definitely happen. If people are interested, what I would suggest is simply take a look at a website. If you Google IBCS or HICCUT, they show before and after. So, for example, one of the items they do each year, they take the financial reports from SAP and then they go through them and say, well, we would have done this in a different way. And they're showing exactly very detailed on how they would have perhaps made changes and did the dashboard slightly different. Again, you're learning basically from others in that way. And people are starting to look at that definitely. So is it accepted? Yes. Is it widely adopted yet? No, but I do feel kind of like it's slowly starting to get more and more, because you can also see more and more software companies adopting it, specifically in the analytics field. Any other questions? So there's a question: are the main BI visualization tools on the market IBCS compliant? Um, well, I mean, I'm not an expert on all the different tools, but let me give you my perspective. So SAP Analytics Cloud is IBCS compliant. Power BI, Tableau, Click, they are compliant when using certain partner solutions. So IBCS is one of those areas where, for example, if you want to use Power BI with IBCS or Tableau with IBCS, you need to purchase kind of like an add-on, and then it creates basically IBCS compliant charts, for example. The good thing with SAC is that it follows the rules out of the box. So try one very simple item in SAP Analytics Cloud. Next time you build a dashboard, if you build a chart and you show revenue by country, you will notice it creates a bar chart. If you then take country out and you say, revenue by month, you will notice that SAC will change the chart from a bar chart to a column chart, because according to IBCS, time moves from left to right, so it shouldn't be a bar chart. Obviously, you can override it and go back and say, no, I want this to be a bar chart. Yes, but the proposal is not to do it. So yes, there are compliant tools out there. In most cases, it means to purchase a partner add-on. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but you basically have to put kind of like that IBCS compliance into the product, which with SAC you don't. So it comes out of the box as part of that. Well, with that, I want to say thank you to everyone. We're basically running out of time now, and I don't see any additional questions. Again, if there's anything else afterwards, feel free to reach out. As I mentioned, we're putting the recording and the slides onto the YouTube channel, where basically all our webinars go. So you can watch the recording, you can see the material. I would highly recommend just give it a try. Think about your own notation. Start with basically perhaps your next project, and think about kind of like what is it that you're trying to do with the dashboard, and basically then see how your business audience actually reacts, and then go from there. Thank you for everybody.